Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. I have beaten the game, and it's now time to talk about the truth of this game. The whole truth. And let me tell you, the truth about this game feels like it's been pretty hard to come by. The conversation online over the last few weeks has been dominated by Metroid Prime 4, which is kind of surprising considering how quote-unquote niche the series is. Yet despite that, yes, there have been so much conversations about this game. A lot of takes, a lot of positive takes, a lot of praises, but also a lot of negative takes, a lot of controversy. It's been very divisive, and so it's probably kind of hard for some people to understand what is actually the truth about Metroid Prime 4. Is it a bad game? Is it a good game? Is it a great game? Is it a game that's for you? That's probably hard to tell when just taking a look at the conversations that have been taking place online. And myself personally, going into this game, I have to continually tell myself that I need to come up with my own opinions on the matter. When I saw the reviews, there were some great positive reviews, but there were also some reviews that were extremely negative, more negative than I thought reasonably possible for a Metroid Prime game. And yet, there are outlets out there that have said some pretty negative things about the game, so negative they would have you believe that this game is a complete and utter dumpster fire, should not be played, and is a complete disgrace to the series, suggesting the series should never come back. Do I think that's the case? No, by no stretch of the imagination. But is this game worthy of the Metroid Prime name? Is this game worth picking up? Is this game worth it for people who haven't played a Metroid Prime game before, or perhaps are on the fence because they're not as in love with Metroid Prime as I am or other Metroid Prime fans? Well, let's dive into it all. Let's talk about the whole truth of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Let's start off by talking about the visuals of this game, because we can say with objectivity, Metroid Prime 4 is one of the most technically impressive Nintendo games ever. It's not close. There are maybe some games you could put in the same conversation in terms of just being extremely technically impressive, like Tears of the Kingdom or Donkey Kong Bonanza, but that's because those games are doing some impressive things with their physics. Metroid Prime 4, from a visual perspective purely in terms of how it looks, is maybe the best looking Nintendo game ever made. It is just straight up beautiful. There is so much variety to the different environments. You have a Fury Green, which is a thick, dense jungle with beautiful little details. And I think something that is perhaps missed in many games, because I play games on PC and PlayStation as well. It's not like I only play on Nintendo, I don't. So I do get to see games made with far more powerful hardware. And I'll look at some of these games and yeah, they'll be beautiful. But I also find it oftentimes the case that there's just so much put on screen, it doesn't really flow well. And I think that's something that Retro Studios got right with Metroid Prime 4, as they have in the past. And that's that their art direction fueled their graphical production. And what I mean is that you look at Fury Green, yes, it's dense with so many details, but it flows well. It's not jarring. You're looking at this beautiful, exotic, alien jungle world. It's not just a dense mess, it's a very well understood, lush environment that is easy on the eyes. And there's such an attention to detail, like you might see some crickets carrying leaves crossing a thick vine or branch, or you'll see little bits of dust or particles in the air with a little bit of color. Or you can simply enjoy the light rays shining through the architecture or the canopies above. It's a beautiful environment. But let's not just talk about Fury Green, because there are other beautiful places in the world of Viros, the planet that Metroid Prime 4 is mostly taking place in. You have places like Volt Forge, and when you're in there, you can see the lightning striking, you can see the different colors of the light, you can see Samus chilling on her Viola motorcycle and just looking at her model, looking at her bike, looking at how light is reflected and how everything just comes together. It's glorious. Or when you're exploring the ice belt in the underground lab and you see that the ice is melting, you see the water dripping, you see the the yellow hazard lights shining through with all the white from the ice and just what was supposed to be a medical facility a long time ago. Or the cool effects we'll see with snow frosting on Samus's arm cannon. And so you have the art direction and the density to the environments and the texture detail and the other little bonus effects in conjunction with far more skill than we've ever seen in any other prior Metroid title. It's not just the vast desert, but other environments as well, where we can see there's a lot more to the environment, like the opening to the ice belt or some areas in the Great Mines. There are areas here that are far larger and more open than any other Metroid game. And so that sense of scale can help provide an extra level of awe, especially when you account for all the other visual details and variety this game has to offer. But let me come back to the desert here, because there have been a lot of people making mention of the desert, trying to use the desert as like a sore spot in the overall visuals of the game. And the fact does remain that this game was made for Switch 1, and so you are still going to see some details, not just in the desert, but throughout the game. If you look up close, some textures will look a little muddy. If you look at some trees off into the distance, they won't look super detailed. Like, you're gonna see some little blemishes here and there, because this is still a Switch 1 title, a tablet device that came out in 2017. And so with that technology, we are seeing a game that looks this good. Now on Switch 2 it does look better, the textures are a little bit cleaner, the resolution is sharper, you do have high dynamic range, and also mentioned that the game does load notably faster on Switch 2, yet still, as a Switch 1 title, it holds up really well. But when it comes to the desert, keeping in mind that this was made for Switch 1, this is an open environment that still has a lot of those details, and it still needs to run at 60 frames per second, which is not something you see for really any sort of vast environments on any Switch 1 title. So Retro Studios pulled this off with detail, and I observed zero, absolutely zero performance issues. This is a huge achievement, but in order to accomplish this, yes, some concessions did need to be made. You can notice that there are some areas in the desert that don't have the most advanced geometry. It can look a little blocky in places, not so much so that it's just jarring, that it takes away from your immersion, not in my opinion at least. But if you are looking over everything with the microscope here, and you're trying to pick it apart, then you are going to see some little blemishes like that. And yet I still find that even the desert itself is beautiful. There are a lot of parts that look really good, but if you're just looking at a compressed little clip on Twitter, you're not going to notice all the details. You're not going to notice the sand being blown across the surface with the wind, or just how there are little dust and sand particles in the air all about, or the texture of the sand below your feet, or perhaps the beautiful sky above you. There are details even in the desert that look pretty good, even if it is maybe the least impressive from a visual perspective compared to everything else, because they did have to take into account the scale of the environment and trying to make sure this still ran at a smooth, rock-solid 60 FPS on Switch 1. While the visuals certainly helped to put together an incredible presentation in Metroid Prime 4, something else that needs to be said that perhaps is equally as important, or at least very high up there, is the music and overall sound design in this game. I have said this before a few times, and I will say it again. The best way to play this game is with a quality headset or really great sound system. If you're not listening to this game in the best way possible, you are hampering your experience. You are losing out on a big part to the game that will, yes, make it a much better experience. In terms of the overall musical score, we're talking about an array of songs here that might just be the best collection of Metroid music in a single game we've ever gotten. That may seem like hyperbole, but I think this is actually a debate to be had. For every Metroid Prime game, there's always a couple standouts, but for Metroid Prime 4, I feel like there's something special pretty much everywhere. And each level has multiple tracks depending on the situation, because the levels do change, which we'll get to in a moment here, but there's just so much beautiful music throughout this game. Some of the battle themes, the bosses, Silas's theme, I am in love with it. It's stuck in my head. What else is stuck in my head is just the start screen music. The start screen music is so important to a Metroid game because it is like that first thing you see, that first thing you hear, and that's also stuck in my head. It's beautiful. The singing operas and the chants and all the vocals and everything else we hear, along with the eerie alien style of music all combined, you have some amazing tracks, or even the more guitar-centric themes as well. There's a lot of variety, but it's all very fitting to the different environments and situations throughout Prime 4, and it resonates with you. Pun intended there. It really sticks around, and I think a lot of these tracks I'm going to be listening for a long time to come. But let me also get to the sound effects as well, because I think that's important. Whenever the Grievers appear, which are a common enemy throughout Metroid Prime 4, there's like a ringing that happens that is not pleasant, but it's by design and it fits. It makes you dread fighting these enemies, and especially when you get to a certain point in the game, when you get deep underground, it becomes terrifying. And there will be points where you'll even run into some of these Grievers that are no longer alive, that are corpses, yet you'll still hear a little bit of that ringing in a distorted way. It's disturbing, but it just kind of feeds into the environment, the atmosphere for those particular situations. Or how you might hear the scream of a monster, or the rustling of the leaves, or something off into the distance. There is foreshadowing for different events that will take place throughout your adventure through the sound design. Or even just talking about like ambient effects, like when you're in Fury Green, you can hear different insects and animals off into the distance, or in the desert, you can hear the wind, you can hear the sand being blown by. So there's just a lot of attention to detail with the sound effects that really help to contribute to your immersion in this world. So overall, from both an audio and visual perspective, Metroid Prime 4, I would say, is pretty much the epitome of what you could expect. It is masterpiece material. But going beyond the visuals and the music and the sound design, everything else becomes a bit more debatable. But I want to talk about these other elements first because they really do help to sell the rest of the game. They present everything else. The presentation in this game is superb. I didn't even mention the cutscenes, but there are some cutscenes in this game that are not in-engine, and they look ridiculous, like in a really good way. Like the level of realism and what's being depicted there is something I would never really expect in a Nintendo game. It feels very movie-like, and I mean that in a very, very good way. But it's everything else, like I said, where things become debatable. So let's talk about the level design. The level design of Metroid Prime 4 is, for the most part, linear, like most other Metroid games. And this is something I find interesting because a lot of people have been complaining about the linearity of Metroid Prime 4, but the fact of the matter is, every Metroid game is linear. You are meant to do things in a particular order. However, in some Metroid games, as time has gone on, ways to sequence break and do things out of order and do things more quickly are discovered. Metroid Prime 4 just came out. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility that some ways to sequence break will be discovered. Do I know what ways those could be? No, I am not sure, but I don't want to rule it out entirely. And really what I want to portray here is just that technically, Metroid is a linear experience. However, most of the time, Metroid games like Super Metroid or Metroid Prime 1, they do a great job of fooling you into thinking it's not a linear experience. And so with Metroid Prime 4, something I've noticed is that the game isn't really trying to fool you into thinking it's not a linear experience, and there isn't really that much opportunity to get lost. And I think these elements are definitely leading some people to think that this is not that much of a Metroid game. It doesn't feel Metroid. But I'm going to push back on that as well, because there are other games in the Metroid series where you also don't have much opportunity to get lost, that don't fool you into thinking it's not a linear game, like Metroid Fusion or Metroid Prime 3, and those games are pretty good games as well. So I would say Metroid Prime 4 is more along those lines, like Metroid Fusion, Metroid Prime 3. I will say, after having beaten the game though, I am kind of hoping that in Metroid Prime 5, they do at least at times make you feel a bit more lost. I think feeling lost is a part of the Metroid experience, so I think that is worth pointing out, but I also think it's worth pointing out, and perhaps even more so, that Metroid Prime 4 should not be docked for not being Metroid Prime 1 or Super Metroid. And I feel a lot of the criticisms about Metroid Prime 4 that I've heard, at least publicly, before going into my own playthrough, are that it's not Metroid Prime 1, and that just doesn't seem fair to me. Play Metroid Prime 1, this is something else. I think it's important to try and go into these experiences with an open mind and judge them as they are, not what you wanted them to be. And so yes, with Metroid Prime 4, I wanted it to be a giant labyrinth, a world that I could get lost in. And in a sense, I did get lost, because I was immersed in my experience. I played 30 plus hours of the game in about 5 days, which is not something I can say for Hyrule Warriors, or Donkey Kong, or Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. I was completely immersed into Metroid Prime 4, so they definitely did something right. But basically, how the structure of the game is, you have the opening on Planet Tanimar, which is basically just a few minutes to introduce you to the normal style of Metroid gameplay, and it sets the scene for the rest of the game. And then you find yourself in Chrono Tower, which is a very beautiful, mysterious place that definitely had me excited for the rest of the game, which sets things up for the rest of your adventure, which essentially begins on Fury Green. And even there's still some level of tutorial there. This is where you do run into Miles Mackenzie after a little while, after doing some puzzles and exploring the beautiful lush jungle. And then after you get through that experience, which is all relatively short compared to the other major areas of the game, this is where we start to see a little bit of a pattern. So when you go to Volt Forge, and then you go to Ice Belt, and then the other areas, there is a shift that happens in these worlds, and that's where I think things get really interesting. So there's a moment when you turn on the power in Volt Forge where the music changes, and the music is absolutely beautiful, and it really helps to sell a different experience. Once the generators are on, there are Cybots that are alive that are now going to be aggressive and attack you. The environment transforms as you're coming back up, and you have to go to the next area in Volt Forge. Or the same applies to the Ice Belt. At first, there are really no enemies to attack you. It's just dark and creepy and atmospheric, and you're learning about the lore of what happened to the little Morn. There's a lot of opportunity to read the lore and learn about what happened when it comes to the Great Tragedy. But then you get to a point where you turn on the power, and then the ice starts melting, and then all these pods that were hosting Grievers melt, and it becomes something completely different. And so music-wise, visually-wise, gameplay-wise, the areas change after a certain point in your adventure. And the same can be said for Flare Pool and the Great Mines as well. And what's interesting is not just the fact that they designed these worlds to change as you progress the first time, but even going back a second time. I would actually say that while Metroid Prime 4 may lack that element of getting lost, what it does better than a lot of other Metroid games is backtracking. Backtracking is perhaps the most rewarding in Metroid Prime 4 than any other Metroid game, because there's a lot of change that they've designed around with each area, and every time you go back, there's something different about it. There's a new experience there that can be fun. It could be a completely unique platforming element. It could be new enemies, a new boss fight, more story that you didn't expect, running into a different character that you didn't think would be there. And so while Metroid Prime 4 isn't a geniusly designed, interwoven world, each area, in a completely different fashion, is designed in a genius manner to change as you progress throughout the game. And it really makes exploring these areas a lot more fun and interesting every time you go back, because it doesn't feel like the same experience. You're not just going back through the same hallways because you keep missing that next power-up or that next door that leads you elsewhere. It's essentially a new level. And the hub world you'll be traversing between these areas is the desert. And when it comes to the desert, from a gameplay perspective, I do actually find myself enjoying it a fair bit. I liked the desert, but I should note, I'm also the kid who would play the Wind Waker, and even after discovering the ability to fast travel to different points in the ocean, I would still usually opt to just sail from one point to another. Or when playing Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, yeah, I can fast travel and I do so sometimes, but most of the time, I opt to just ride around on my horse or find some creative way to traverse throughout the land of Hyrule. Even in Mario Kart World, I really liked the open world. I liked racing around and just messing around with the mechanics. So in Soul Valley, the desert, I like racing around on Viola, enjoying the dune buggy experience, the physics that they took the time to put in there, so you can enjoy jumping and bumping around from one slope to another across this vast desert expanse. And so whenever it was time to go back to the desert to get to the next area, I wasn't going in a straight line. I almost never go in a straight line. Every time I see a green crystal, I veer left or right or take a U-turn to crash into it, and then little by little I make my way to that next area. But if I find a point of interest, I explore it. If I see something shining in the sand, I'll go to it, yank it out, find a missile expansion. Or if I see a shrine, I'll go to it, see if I can do anything there. And early on I found I was getting definitely that Metroid experience of, oh, I can't access that yet. That shrine has some sort of red door or thing and I can't do it yet. I probably have to unlock some sort of flame shot or fire beam. And so as I progressed in the game and I unlocked more and more power-ups, I got excited to go back to the desert to go to these shrines or go to the Galactic Federation debris sites and see if I can do something there, find what's there, obtain the power-up, discover more secrets. And so really I found myself really enjoying the desert, and once it came time to enter the end sequence of the game, I was actually well past the point of having collected enough green crystals. So I think I played the game the way it was intended to be played, enjoying the desert from point A to B. But when you go back to some of the critical reviews, a lot of people complain about the desert, say that there's a lot to do at the end, you were forced to collect a whole bunch of green crystals. And so, given that a lot of people had that experience, I have to think that they felt forced to rush through the adventure. I don't think you're supposed to be playing Metroid Prime 4 in a rush. I think you're meant to just enjoy each experience as they come. And also, by the way, you should be depositing your green crystals every once in a while. The menu does tell you when it's time to deposit them to get a reward, but there are rewards that are very, very satisfying. And so personally, I actually really enjoyed the desert and also was not bothered by the quote-unquote lack of music. There actually is music in Soul Valley, it's just more ambient. You'll hear like these ghostly chants and sings, and you hear the sand blowing off into the distance. It's very alien. It feels like Mars, or as a lot of people said, it feels like a reminder of 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's creepy, it's haunting, it's eerie, and I think it's actually a nice contrast compared to the other areas of the game that have more loud, energetic, bombastic scores, which are incredible and are stuck in my head and I love to revisit. But my main point here is that the desert feels like something different. What's clear to me is that it was intended for this ambience to be what you hear playing through the desert, and I personally like it. What I didn't like though about the desert is that every time you go into the desert you hear from miles, and it seems to happen with too much frequency in my opinion. As I said earlier, they don't really let you get lost, and I think it would have been better to let you get lost. Now I understand, I think what they're trying to do with Metroid Prime 4 is make it accessible to a larger audience. I think a lot of people who have tried Metroid in the past really struggle to finish the game, so they really want to help you actually finish the game. But I think there is perhaps a better balance that could have been struck, and it's a little bit too much help, and I'll speak more on that a little bit later. And yet, despite that, I still found myself really very much enjoying the desert part, along with the rest of the levels in Metroid Prime 4, just not in the way I thought I would. Something else that I really enjoyed in this game are the powers and the puzzles. I think they did an exceptional job with the kinds of powers and the puzzles that are in this game. Like, I really enjoy the puzzles we found in the shrines. The shrines themselves in the desert are very cool, and then the puzzles and power-ups you obtain from them are also very cool. But what I was most impressed by were the psychic powers. And the reason I was impressed by them is because oftentimes you will collect a new psychic power, which is basically a power you've had before, but every time it's remixed. So for example, you get these psychic bombs for your Morph Ball, and in prior Metroid games, and even in the beginning of Metroid Prime 4, you have your typical Morph Ball bomb that works as it has in the past. You place a bomb, after a moment it blasts you upwards, you can use multiple at different points, you can even use it to double jump in Morph Ball mode. That's all standard, and when you obtain the psychic bomb, it works in the exact same way. But there is a little bit of a difference. There's a little bit of a psychic element to it. So with the psychic bombs, you can actually use them to leave around a moat, and then you can go into your normal form or your psychic visor, grab that moat, and then throw that into a socket where they can then power some sort of device in the environment. So that's an extra little angle they've added to these psychic bombs, and this trend continues with all the different psychic powers. The grapple beam does more than it has in prior games. It actually functions a lot more like a claw shot now, but of course you also have the psychic lasso, or like the psychic boots. At first you may think, oh, psychic boots are just the jump boots or the double jump, and yes, you do have your extra double jump there, but it's more than that because with the psychic boots they grant you the ability to land on psychic platforms. I was also impressed by the consistent value of the control beam, an ability you get early on, a psychic power that is effective throughout the entire game. There are many puzzles pretty much in every area that take advantage of the control beam, and it's useful even outside of that. Its utility can be effective in battle to slow things down, to knock back certain enemies when you're in a bind, and it's effective till the very end. So, love this inclusion. And so all the psychic powers have another extra little mix thrown in. They're not just the same powers, just with psychic slapped on. It's a little bit more than that, and I was impressed by how they were able to remix all the powers, making them feel a little bit different, having a little bit more compared to all other prior Metroid games. After all these years, they're still able to come up with new ideas with how you can use Samus's different abilities, which I really enjoyed, especially for a lot of the puzzles once you beat all the main stuff and you're going around collecting, trying to get 100%. I think that may be one of the most rewarding parts to this game, when you go that extra mile to find all the other puzzles that are extra challenging, and in some cases you run into some unique scenarios, like even like a surprise non-mandatory mini-boss, which I won't spoil here, but it's very cool. So if you go for 100% items, you'll see what I mean. There are some pretty cool puzzles and a lot of nice, interesting ways to use your power-ups. However, I also feel like there could have been more. And so what I mean is, there is this power you can use with the super bombs, which is something you obtain fairly late into the game. And even the psychic super bomb does have its own little element thrown in there where you can leave around a giant moat of that. And so you can actually go into your scan visor, grab the super bomb moat, and you can basically throw a super bomb, which is cool in theory, but there's only one time in the game that this is needed for a puzzle. One single time. And if you have the tutorial system on, which is the default option, the game tells you how to do it. Why would it tell you how to do it if you're never going to have to use it again? Of course, I'll even say with this power bomb throwing option, I haven't tested it out with different fights, so it might just be useful from a combat perspective, but still, I would have liked to have used it for more than just one puzzle. So while I did enjoy all the puzzles and the power-ups, I am left thinking there could have been more, and in one sense you could say it's a good thing, being left wanting more, but in another, I do feel like the powers that are there, we should actually use them. And so while there were some cool ideas, and a lot of them are executed well, I feel like we got some great ideas that were hardly used. But continuing to speak on Samus's abilities, I do have to say that the combat in this game is the best it has ever been. As I've talked about in previous videos, Samus moves around better than she ever has before. Not only does she have her left and side dashes, but they've added now a forward and back dash, which are interesting to use in combat. Now, I will say, with the forward dash, oftentimes I found that I would just forward dash just to get hit. I think it would have been interesting if they added something to that forward dash, like a bit of a melee attack, or a little bit of perhaps super armor so you can actually bash into the enemy using this method. But ultimately I felt that Samus was very fast, faster than prior Metroid Prime games at least, and aiming around felt fantastic, and I really loved using the different shot options, the different elemental attacks which have their own advancements, and then you have your missiles, and then you have your beam, which can improve a little bit as you progress as well. And so all that together, you definitely have quite an array of options, and they're all effective in different situations, which I thought they did a great job of, actually giving meaning for when you should be using missiles, for when you should be using your beam weapon, for when you should be using your fire, thunder, or ice shots. And so I think they did a great job there. And what I also think they did a great job with is the lock-on plus free aim mechanic. This is something we started to see in Metroid Prime 3, but in Metroid Prime 4 with each boss fight, they really take this to another fun level. So it starts off with the first boss fight, Abrax. You can lock onto the enemy. When you lock onto the enemy, this is when you can do your different directional dashes and jump around, dodge attacks, get behind, and all that stuff. But also you have the option to just continue stay shooting where you're locked on, that's fine, but if you start aiming around, you are focused on the enemy, but you can free aim around the enemy. And so each boss, you can lock onto them, as you can for any enemy, but they have different key points on them that you will want to shoot at that will hurt them. And so each boss is designed around this mechanic, which makes each boss fight all the more interesting. And just on the note of boss fights overall in this game, I actually think Metroid Prime 4 might have the overall best array of bosses in the entire series. And there are some fantastic bosses in Metroid history, but I gotta tell you, there are some here that are fantastic. I'm not going to spoil too much. I'll save that for my spoiler section later on into this review. But there are some massive bosses, there are some challenging bosses, there's a lot of variety, the themes are epic. I think they really did a fantastic job here. I really don't have much criticisms on the boss fights, they were wonderful. The only criticisms I have on how they handled the boss fights is, one, it would have been nice to replay these boss fights, like maybe like some sort of boss rush mode. Now of course you can just replay the game, and I do think this game is fairly digestible. You can jump right back in, which is what I'm going to do. But something that did bother me about one of the boss fights, and this is actually kind of a serious issue, at least for me personally, is that the Carvex boss fight, it has 3 mandatory scans. Now, for most people, probably doesn't matter. Most people probably aren't going to try to hit 100% on their first go-around. But for me, this was an issue because I scanned Carvex once, as I thought would be needed for every boss fight at least once, and I was looking around and I saw, oh, there's a second scan to this boss, so I made sure to get a second scan. That was already out of the ordinary. But by the time I got a second scan, I thought, okay, I'm good. I've gone all the mandatory scans in Carvex, one of the early bosses in the game, and so I continued my venture throughout the entire experience, putting in extra time to make sure I would hit that 100%, looking for every little thing. I thought I was missing some sort of random sandbird. As it turned out, Carvex had 3 scans, and I realized this in the very last hour before I jumped into the final sequence. And so that was extremely disappointing. My first run, I was only able to beat Metroid Prime 4 Beyond to 99.9%, not 100. And there's no way to get this scan. I have heard though that if you do miss certain enemies like the snow wolves, or if you don't scan a boss, you can find ways to scan them. Like there is literally a room where you can scan the bosses, and with the snow wolves apparently you can see one off into the distance later on. But for Carvex specifically, there are extra scans and there's no way to get those. So it's an annoyance, but at the same time, I'm going to be playing this game more than once, now I know. That's just kind of, I guess, what comes with the Metroid experience. There are going to be some missable scans if you're going for 100%, so of course, on that next go-around, you want to be careful about that. And I guess this would be the best opportunity to now start talking about the difficulty of the game and the accessibility of the game. I have both compliments and critiques here. So, going back to the whole scan thing, I can appreciate the challenge of there being missable scans, but they do offer ways to find some of those scans that you might have missed, like with the boss fights. However, while they offer this option, you can still miss the extra scans, which is pretty frustrating. So, which is it? Are you trying to make things accessible to people, or are you trying to offer extreme challenge? It feels like they're doing a little bit of both. They also make it relatively easy to get 100% items in this game, which I actually do not have an issue with. I don't think it takes away too much from the challenge, it just makes it less frustrating. So you can find these scout drones, and there is challenge in finding the scout drones, having the power-ups to get them, so you don't really get to all of them until late game. And then you have to go to each sort of general region to see where the items are in that area, and then even when you're in these particular rooms where an item might be, you still have to figure out the puzzle. So I don't think it takes too much away from the experience of finding everything. I actually think it just makes it, well, less frustrating and more doable, so ultimately more fun. So I actually like the inclusion of the scout drones. It's a great idea, and also makes it more easy to 100% the game, but in a good way, in my opinion, thus making the game more completable for more people, so hopefully more people can get into Metroid. That part I respect and understand. Now, they didn't make this game, like, extremely easy either. I did die or lose a handful of times, and maybe that's just because I wasn't fully focused, and that's fine, but I think the main point to be made here is that there is a healthy balance of difficulty, in my opinion, for normal mode. There's enough of a challenge where you feel like the stakes are high, like you can lose, you feel that threat, so it's exhilarating, and you feel satisfied when you win. It's a rewarding experience, but it's also not so challenging that it's extremely frustrating that's going to push people away from wanting to complete the game. And so I think they actually struck a really nice balance with normal mode. What I did not like, though, is just how often you are hinted as to where to go next. I think they should have slowed down with that. This goes back to the beginning of the game where you run into Miles McKenzie. Miles McKenzie, I actually like as a character. As the story progresses, he becomes very likable, and I'll speak on him and the other troopers later on. But the amount of advice he offers in Fury Green when you're with him for about 15 minutes or so, it's too much in my opinion. I think the way it should have been done is he doesn't say much until you take a long time to figure it out. I don't want to be told, hey, to get missiles and use them within 15 seconds of having them. If you wait a couple minutes, then it makes more sense, or if you go to him and speak to him directly, that makes more sense. So I think there's some balancing that needs to be done there, but this is also just a small part to the game. However, when you go to Volt Forge next, he does speak with you a fair bit early on, but then radio comms die out. So in Volt Forge, you may actually be confused, and you may want to speak to Miles and then realize you can't speak to him, and so you find yourself missing him. This did happen a few times for me early on to my experience, which is something I actually appreciated, getting to a point where I would actually miss Miles, which is kind of surprising. However, diving deeper and deeper into the experience, once I'm well acquainted with the world and what I need to do and how to navigate and all, it's kind of annoying to be told, hey, you should go to the volcano area. Hey, you should go to the volcano area repeatedly. It's a little bit too much, and sometimes I was already kind of thinking, oh, maybe I should go in this direction. And so when I'm told that, it kind of takes a little bit away from the discovery I would have had I done it on my own. So I think that's something they need to dial it back on. It's not something so terrible that it ruins my experience, but it is a critique. I think they should have it. I think they should tell you where to go next, as other Metroid games do, but offer a way to turn it off completely. And even when it's on, dial it back a little bit. If someone wants to be able to progress throughout the game, if they give up in 5 minutes, they probably shouldn't be playing games anyway. Let people get lost a little bit. And so that's my main issue with that. Not a huge giant deal, but it was an annoyance that definitely impacted the experience to some small extent. But let's now talk about the Federation troopers overall, because there's a lot of controversy surrounding these characters, and quite honestly, I like them. I grew to like them. I did not like them at first. I tried to keep an open mind. I didn't jump to conclusions and assume this game was going to be a dumpster fire because they included characters like they did in Prime 3, but I did not love them at first. As I've already noted, I was actually a little bit annoyed by the constant feedback and assistance from Miles, but as time progressed, I actually found myself missing him, and then I would run into him later on and get to know him more, and he had some funny comments, and there are different things like that that happened, and then you run into more characters. Like with Tokabi, there's actually a really cool sequence that happens when you enter the Ice Belt area. Very cool. Loved how I ended up meeting Tokabi. When he starts talking, I actually felt like the pacing was a little off. But then once I actually start diving into Ice Belt, he doesn't talk that often, and I felt that dialogue was pretty good. And then later on to the game, you do meet and talk with him multiple times, and I felt like those interactions were pretty strong. In fact, I feel like there are some scenes with this character. They're some of the best scenes we've seen in Metroid in terms of characterizing the world and even providing some interesting insight into Samus herself. You're actually going to have some run-ins with this character in the desert, and there are some pretty cool special moments, I would say. But this is where things start to get perhaps divisive, because I had heard that after Ice Belt, the ice area to the game, that the game falls off. And I said that with air quotes because, well, I don't think the game falls off really at all. It's just maybe not what you would expect from your typical Metroid game. And what I mean is that, yes, in the Flare Pool region, during the main sequence of that area, you are going to be traveling alongside some Federation troopers. And the same can be said for the next area in the Great Mines. And there are some Metroid purists that are going to hate that idea that you're not completely isolated. But personally, as someone who is trying to go into this with an open mind and just experience it for what it is, not expecting it to be a prior Metroid game, but what this Metroid game is, I actually really enjoyed these areas. I think they were incredible just for different reasons. And there are still points where you are alone, where you are isolated. It's just not for the entire game. And I actually felt that with the Great Mines in particular, it gets very scary, very dark, very gruesome, very haunting, even when there are characters next to you, and they're not there the entire time. Put it this way, I don't want to spoil too much, but when I explored this area, and after I got out of it, which was quite a challenge in a good, fun way, I was traumatized. I did not want to press the missile button anymore. Every time I saw something where I want to, like for example, the bug nest that you can destroy quickly with a missile, I'd be about to press them and be like, wait, you know what? I don't want to do that because of what happened in the mines. It was an incredible experience. The fact that the game made me feel that afterwards. So I think that speaks volumes to what that scenario provided. But coming back to the troopers themselves, as you get to know them, there are different interesting interactions. If you're going back to base camp throughout the game, there are different dialogues and events that occur, and there are little interesting details. You'll see that they put up their own sleeping bags. They might be cooking a creature they found in the area. And so there are just fun little interactions and things that happen there. Things that you might appreciate in maybe a Zelda game or something like that. And perhaps some Metroid purists will be upset because, oh, how dare they put other characters? How dare they have conversations and character development? But I actually really liked this stuff. This stuff was cool. It may not be the thing I've come to expect from Metroid, but it's something that I really enjoyed about Metroid Prime 4. As the story progressed and I got to know them more, I cared about these characters and their fates, which is put into question multiple times, which adds to the intrigue with the story and the scenarios because you're concerned, oh, what's going to happen? Are you going to lose them? Are they going to die? Can you save them? And so ultimately, I'm going to say, yes, the Federation troopers were an overall positive to the experience. But I'm only saying that because I went into this with an open mind. I didn't play this game expecting to get Metroid Prime 1, but a new Metroid experience, which is what this is. And so, on the note of the story, I do think the Federation troopers help to carry a lot of the story. There is more there. I actually feel that there are some pretty strong cutscenes with the Lemorn. You can find actually Lemorn statues hidden throughout the world, and if you scan them, you get a little bit more of a cutscene. But then also, especially in the Ice Belt area, the amount of lore, different data entries you can read. You can sort of get an understanding of what happened in the past, learn about the Great Tragedy. There's even a cutscene you can unlock that's very gruesome, very cool, but it tells you what happened with the Great Tragedy. And there's some stuff like this in the other areas as well, but I do think it's strongest in the Ice Belt from a lore perspective. This is all interesting, neat stuff. I did really like the cutscenes. I felt like the opening to the game, both on Planet Tanimar and in Chrono Tower, were also very strong. And I did like the ending. And I'm going to have to do a whole separate video on the ending explaining how it works, because I know for some people it was confusing, a little bit of a cliffhanger. But to put it simply, I think it's become pretty clear that they made Metroid Prime 4 while also thinking that they're going to make a Metroid Prime 5, which fuels an interesting rumor, but again, that's a conversation for a whole other time. I think this game sets up a lot, and it actually ends on a beautiful and somber note, which I think is fitting for this overall experience. And ultimately, I liked the story here. And also, let me say this, as someone who has studied theater and film acting and direction and stories, I did not think the dialogue was bad. I did not think the voice acting was bad. There are some awkward moments, I'll say that, but I thought they ultimately handled these characters and the voice acting and their interactions with Samus well. Not perfect, but for a video game, I liked it. I enjoyed it. I was immersed in my experience for the most part. Something else I'll address is the complaints regarding pacing. Honestly, I didn't think there was a real issue with that, but that's because I was playing Metroid Prime 4 without having to rush through it. I didn't feel like there was a drag of a fetch quest at the end because I had already collected all my green crystals, which to me were fun to collect in between all the different dives into each dungeon area of the game. But if you're just blitzing through the desert, not collecting green crystals, not going to the shrines, not looking for the Lemorn statues, not trying to find all the different expansions embedding into the ground, or checking out the debris sites, then yeah, you're gonna have a lot to do at the end of the game, because you skipped a lot of it. I didn't have that issue because I played the game, I feel, in a natural way, so I enjoyed it, and I thought it all flowed pretty well. But by this point, I think I've covered most of my thoughts on Metroid Prime 4. I am going to do a spoiler section next, so if you want to avoid spoilers, this is your opportunity. I'm just going to kind of gush over some really cool moments in the game. But before doing that, let me just kind of give you my general conclusion. And so my general conclusion is this. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is not the Metroid game that people thought it would be. It's something else. And so in order to fully enjoy this game, I think you need to go at it with an open mind and appreciate it for what it is, not for what you wanted it to be. And I can understand why some people would go into this game with such high expectations, because we did wait for such a long time. Considering the long development cycle, one might be left to think that this has to be like a huge game. And the fact of the matter is, Metroid Prime 4 is about the size of any other Metroid Prime game. And that's a fine size, but if you had such extraordinary expectations that it would be like double or triple the size of a normal Metroid Prime game, you're gonna be disappointed. This is about the same as other Metroid Prime games. And it does some things better than any other game in the series, and then there are other things where they make choices that might be a bit confusing, or are just not the choices you would come to expect if you only wanted to play Metroid Prime 1 again, or only play Metroid Prime 2 again. This is not Metroid Prime 1, this is not Metroid Prime 2, this is not Metroid Prime 3. It's Metroid Prime 4. It's its own experience. And so with that in mind, me trying to go into this game with an open mind, I really liked Metroid Prime 4 a lot. I think it's absolutely deserving of the Metroid Prime name. I think the overall response from critics is not really matching to what this game is. I think the game is actually underrated, as we've been seeing from the user scores. Fans who have been playing this game have been rating this game higher than critics, even though there's also a lot of people out there that are extremely angry about Metroid. It's caught up in a lot of controversy, which would then lead itself towards a lot of review bombing. So despite the review bombs, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, from a user score perspective, is in line with the other Metroid games. And so I think that speaks to the overall situation. Metroid Prime 4 is a very fun game, and I think as time progresses, we'll be able to look at this game a little bit more objectively as a whole, and it's going to be one of those games that people are going to want to revisit. It's going to be very digestible, kind of like Resident Evil 4 or The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. I really love going back to those games, or like Metroid Prime 1. They're fun to replay every few years, and I think the same can be said for Metroid Prime 4. Not perfect, but there is no such thing as a perfect game, and I think things are very well set up for a Metroid Prime 5. I believe that's probably already in development, and I think with Retro Studios now having established a formula, they'll have some time to improve upon it. Maybe things will be a little bit more difficult, a little bit less hand-holdy. Maybe they'll do a little bit more of that interwoven maze of a world so we can get lost a little bit more. And Metroid Prime 5 might be considered an even better game. We'll see. But still, after beating Metroid Prime 4, I am enthralled with the experience. I keep thinking about it. I want to go back to it, continue to play it. It is a fun, fun game. One of the best games of the year, and definitely underrated. But now for some spoilers. Man, Benaros, oh, that was so freaking cool. I know some people don't love the flare pool area because you have to do it with the Federation troopers at certain points, but man, Benaros is the largest boss ever in Metroid history. It has two huge, crazy, totally unique phases that are absolutely epic. It might be one of my favorite boss fights ever. So cool. I mean, I loved all the boss fights, really. It's just so good what they did with Benaros, so good what they did in the Great Mines, with all the Grievers. It was terrifying. I loved it. That's what traumatized me with using missiles. Like, you use a missile, it causes a lot of sound, so the Grievers are just erupting from the ground everywhere, attacking from the behind, and left, and right, and so that was super cool. I kind of liked how the troopers were sacrificing themselves to allow you to get deeper in so you could obtain the final key. What I didn't like is that once you thought you were finally alone, then View was like, oh, I made it down here, and so you weren't alone until like the very end. And then when you think everyone has sacrificed themselves, they all survive. They all made it, which kind of takes a little bit away from their sacrifice. But I guess when you don't know what's going to happen, there's an appreciation or a fear that something might happen. And so it was cool to tease that, especially because, well, this is the spoiler section. Time to talk about the ending. In the end, Samus is forced to leave them all behind, and you're left to wonder what happens to them. Maybe they do all actually die. So they do all make their great sacrifice. Miles McKenzie jumps in to save you from Sax's final shot, which is interesting because we had all these theories about what's going to happen to Miles, and he's the ultimate hero at the end. He sacrifices himself to save Samus, which is a fun little idea. Now, do they all actually die? They all seem alive when you're leaving, but do they survive that interaction with Sylux? That I am unsure of. And I have a lot of thoughts on Sylux, but that's going to be saved for the ending analysis. I just want to say that the final boss, very cool. Love that stuff. I do think that they probably could have fit in a little bit more about Sylux's backstory. Yes, I understand that if you get the 100% cutscene, it explains things a little bit better, but that's a 100% cutscene. Not everyone's going to get 100%. Most people won't, actually. And so they'll have to go to YouTube to see that scene, and so you're kind of left to think that Sylux is just, like, a really crazy, mean person. And even after the cutscene, that's still kind of the thought process. I'm left to think there's still a lot more to learn about Sylux, which that's what I'm hoping to learn even more about in Metroid Prime 5. But yeah, final boss, amazing. Fenris, amazing. I love this game, honestly. It's very good. It's a very good game that's getting way too much flack. Is it perfect? No, but there really is no such thing as perfection. I think sometimes people just need to learn to live a little and enjoy life and appreciate things for what they are. But I loved Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. It's a great game. Anyways, everyone, those are my thoughts on Metroid Prime 4. I'm sure there'll be more, but what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.